Why should I get a CADIFA? If you are an API supplier and you have heard that there are some new regulations for APIs in Brazil, and now you can request a CADIFA, you may be wondering, why would someone want that? We have shown in the previous videos what is a CADIFA and how to request one. But if you are still unsure if there is any benefit of getting one, we will show you now that there are many. A CADIFA is in Brazil something like the CEP in Europe. Do you see any advantage in getting a CEP if you market your API in Europe? Then these are the same advantages of getting a CADIFA if you want to market your API in Brazil. If you have a CADIFA, this means your DMF was already evaluated and approved by Anvisa. So let's say you are currently supplying your API to only one client in Brazil, MAH1. You cannot simply request a CADIFA linked to their dossier, because this is already approved, so Anvisa does not need to evaluate your DMF for that dossier right now, unless there is any variation. However, if you submit your DMF to Anvisa through the application of a new client, let's say MAH2, Anvisa will need to evaluate your DMF for that, so you can get a CADIFA linked to the dossier of MAH2. Then, let's say that a third company wants to include you as an alternative source for a certain API, and this will be MAH3. Since you already have a CADIFA for that API now, upon this submission, Anvisa will not need to evaluate your DMF all over again, as long as your CADIFA is referenced in the dossier of MAH3. In this case, you will not receive additional deficiency letters from Anvisa regarding that DMF, which we all really appreciate. And something that is important, that CADIFA will not be automatically linked to the dossier of MAH1. This company will need a variation procedure to do that. What about the documentation that needs to be included in the DMF? This should be in CTD format, and it is all described in the CADIFA Guidance for Administrative Procedures, issued by Anvisa. The link is in the description box below. The variation procedures are basically the same as for EDQM. So you do not need to find out how a specific change would be classified in Brazil. All you need is to know how the change is classified for EDQM. Then in Brazil, it will be the same. Besides, once you have a CADIFA, any variation procedure is handled directly with Anvisa, which will be a much quicker process. But of course, a close relationship needs to be maintained with the MAH, who needs to be aware of any change so that they can evaluate the impact for their controls and the finished product. A CADIFA can also offer the API manufacturer a strategic advantage for that market. If an API supplier already holds a CADIFA, there is no risk that Anvisa will reject that DMF for a new submission, because this is already approved. So if a pharma company needs to choose its API supplier, considering supplier 1 already has a CADIFA, but supplier 2 does not, having a CADIFA may give you additional points in the selection process, since this may be considered less risky for their submission. Also, getting a CADIFA will not be an option after August 2023 in certain cases. It will be mandatory for any new submission or when a variation is made to add a new API supplier for an approved drug product. We have a transition period until then, which depends not only on the submission date, but also on the manufacturing date of the pilot batch produced by the MAH for that submission. But after that, if you have interest in expanding to the Brazilian market, there will be no other way. And finally, there is no cost to request for a CADIFA. only for getting the GMP certificate. Of course, there needs to be some understanding of Anvisa's electronic system, which today is mainly in Portuguese. However, the guidance we mentioned describes all the details in English as well. But is there any other drawback for the API supplier? Someone may argue that a CADIFA may impose additional technical requirements, but this is actually not true. Anvisa has been evaluating DMFs with the same requirements even if a CADIFA is not requested. So if you are planning to submit your DMF to Anvisa's evaluation, these are some key points to have in mind. Hopefully, this will help you decide if it is worth it to take this chance and request for a CADIFA.